Ford CEO ordered that they're going to have to slash some prices. They can't sell the trucks. They're not moving. Yes, the Ford Lightning, their electric pickup truck, the F-150, is not selling. Not selling well enough, in fact. And while they had success for the first part of 2025 and before that, the fact is every one of those products is moving with only incentives. Once the incentives and that $7,500 tax credit went bye-bye, things have all changed. On top of it, Ford is struggling with sales. Yes, even though they're one of the top sellers of their standard garden variety internal combustion vehicles, the F-150, the problem is with about 118 outstanding recalls, some of which are pretty minor and some of which are pretty major. The fact is they just can't shake the reputation for quality. It's a huge issue for the brand. And how do you get buyer confidence back into the OEMs when they can't build a vehicle that doesn't have a significant number of failures right outside the gate? So the F-150, the internal combustion vehicle, sure, they've been selling. But again, they're starting to lose some market share. The only reason in many cases that they're able to sell so many is because of General Motors, the big conundrums they're faced with right now. They're having all kinds of problems with the 5.3s, their 6.2s, blowing rod bearings, main bearings, 5.3s, and their lifters, rockers are failing left, right, and center. Problem as well, Toyota. You can't even rely on that competition because their V6s are blowing engines and bearings as well. So when you look around, there really isn't that much competition. And that's one of the strong reasons why Ford's had some level of success selling their F-150s in the first place. But specifically when we talk about some of the competition, even in the EV sector, it's quite clear that people have taken sort of a more cool down approach in the latter end of 2025. A lot of it because of that $7,500 tax credit. And unfortunately, because of that, things have had to change. Ford was offering, or they were considering offering, they were reaching out to Ford and see what the corporate can handle, what they can get from a financing perspective. And the idea was to somehow work with the IRS and the OEM and the manufacturing to try to get some of those prices extended. Those $7,500 tax credits were apparently going to be eaten by Ford. Ford was going to essentially take the proverbial bullet over that one in for the sake of trying to pass those savings down to the consumer. But in such ways, of course, like everything, it didn't quite come to fruition, and looking down that path just doesn't seem to be a very profitable approach. Now, Ford's been struggling, and we saw when they first came out way back a couple of years ago, they could not sell at all. They have some competition, the Rivian R1T, the Tesla Cybertruck, even Chevy's new Silverado EV. None of those vehicles are much competition. And when you consider the fact that Ford's, hyping it up that they're selling more electric trucks than their competition, what is that really even saying? Nobody's buying the Cybertruck. Initially, it seemed like a hot truck to buy, and then we heard about some of the issues, of course, politics. Nobody wants a Cybertruck. The sales are in the tank. Of course, when we think about the Rivians, well, they're more of a niche product anyway. And while some people love them, there's just not that many sold. A lot of people would rather get on to a garden variety, something that's a little bit more mainstream and something that we're more familiar with. GM, Chevy, same thing with the Silverado EV. It just hasn't been a real hot seller yet, partially because of the looks, partially because of the cost. And ultimately, a lot of these OEMs are struggling to sell their EVs. And a lot of them are coming out at a time when, let's face it, a lot of the market is sort of softening up for EVs, particularly in the North American market that are all trying to sell these full-size, large, heavy, power-consuming sponges that we're seeing in that space. Rather, people were kind of just going back to the internal combustion engine. And we're seeing a lot of push and influence that way in the North American market. And as a result, the EVs are struggling. Because of that, Ford, of course, is looking at this and saying, you know what do we got to do? We've got to move this product. We've got to keep the sales up for these F-150 Lightnings. Already we saw some of the Ford Mustang Mach-E, which was direct competition to Tesla's Model Y. Of course, those were doing fairly well, but again, heavily under the approach of incentives. See, Ford, if they didn't have incentives backing a lot of their products, they weren't selling the vehicles. That being said, Ford's offering up a lot of new incentives. They're slashing prices. slashing prices on a lot of their EV F-150 Lightnings. They've been slashing prices on the Mustang Mach-E. As a matter of fact, they're even looking at 0% in 72 months for lease. Who ever heard of those types of terms? I've never heard of those types of lease terms up until I've seen the electric vehicle market. We're seeing Hyundai, Kia offer up extended loan terms. We're seeing, even Subaru and some of these other products now to try to move their metal. They're actually having to incentivize at a pretty high number. Long loan terms, long lease terms with very little down, 0%. I mean, ultimately what it means is, to me, is pretty indicative to the market. Customers are not buying the products. And I've got a list of some of the big changes that Ford has coming up with. So they are trying to incentivize the F-150 Lightning. And slashing prices comes in the way of the entry-level XLT trim is being replaced by the STX trim, which will maintain the truck's base flooring price of about $63,345 for the 26 model year. No big changes other than they're sort of leveling it up a little bit. The Flash trim is decreasing by $4,000 from $69,995 in the 25 model year down to $65,995 in 2026. So you're able to get into that. And they're upping some of these battery capacities. They're giving you a little bit longer charge, more horsepower, and they're really doing whatever they can to get people in the door. The Lariat trim is decreasing by $2,000 from $76,995 in 2025 down to about $74,995 in 26. Now, we know why that happens. The Lariat trim is sort of that sweet spot. The XLT, Lariat trims, those are the space where a lot of people that are willing to spend this kind of money on an EV or a very expensive pickup truck are willing to gamble. And they want the features. They want the options. So Ford, of course, they read the writing on the wall and they're looking at this and saying, look, we still need to slash prices. We still need to offer up some great lease options, but we'll also knock some dollars off. The Lariat trim's taking a hit. The Platinum trim is maintaining the pricing ceiling of $84,995 for the 2026. Why would that be? Well, to me, from what I can tell, when you're dealing with Platinum, it really isn't much more than a few decals and a few little trim, decals here, decals there, a nice little brushed aluminum fit and finish there. They might give you a couple of extra features, the heated, cooled seats figure, vibrating, sunroof, all of these great amenities. But they also know that it's that popular space. So clearly, why would they incentivize a vehicle that's selling? That's obviously one of their best sellers. So while they're serious about offering up some incentives, they also recognize, like a lot of OEMs, and this is the big caveat here, if they maintain that high profit margin on a fewer number of sellers, like the Platinum trim, they can make up for all the losses on their lower end trims. See, so where they're given, $4,000 off on the Flash trim, they realize that very few people are buying that, and it looks like a great headline number. $4,000 off. But is it a big discount, really? I mean, let's face it. Even if they are given $4,000 on the base trim, the Platinum, they're making up these massive margins because let's face it, features, options, that's not where the money's at. Well, the money's at there on markups. But it doesn't cost them that much more because the structure of the vehicle's there, the electric motor, the batteries are largely there. Most of the technology is pre-wired from the base trim all the way up to the top trim. The difference is they either turn it on, enable it, put a few extra stickers on the car or the truck. In this case, they're able to charge way more money. And we saw Stellantis doing this a little while back, right? I mean, we saw that during the 21-22 fiasco in the automotive sector, where they realized that the shortages in the supply chain and the shortages of available inventory meant that they were willing to take a hit on the slower trim stuff because they weren't selling and they don't care. It was volume junk that they didn't care. And even if they weren't selling the numbers, they would start rationing chips to the higher volume or the higher profit margin vehicles. And that's how Stellantis made their game. They started bumping up the numbers on the high trim vehicles, the premium vehicle models, the premium trims. That's where they were making this huge spread. So they didn't care if they weren't making much on the little stuff, the Compass and the trash boxes like that. Rather, they were upping the price tag and they were holding firm because they knew there was these huge margins. They didn't have to sell as many cars or trucks or SUVs. Ford, from what I can see, is doing the exact same thing. They're screaming and hollering, hey, we're giving you all these incentives. But is there really an incentive to buy? Sure, lease, you got to give the vehicle back, and that's probably just as well. But honestly, when you look at some of these numbers, $2,000 off for a Lariat? What kind of incentive is that? $2,000? That's nothing. I mean, that's a sneeze in the wind when you're dealing with a truck that's, $77,000 or $75,000. What's $2,000 off? That's really not that much motivation. That could be the difference in a lending term between 4.9 and 5.9% depending on your personal credit score. So that's not a huge impact to the bottom line for them. But you as a consumer look at this and like Jojo, the excited little funny boy there trying to get, I need a deal. And Ford looks like they're offering me great deals. But see, people aren't reading the writing on the wall. These are all smoke and mirrors. And what I can tell is Ford CEOs and all of the top players are making these decisions to focus on the upper trim levels. They know they're not selling a volume game anymore. The volume game is going away because there's less buyers in the pool. Instead, let's focus on the margin game because that's what we're seeing. We're seeing it in Mercedes. We're seeing it in BMW. We're seeing it here in Stellantis and Ford, where it's no longer volume, it's all about margins. So they don't care about selling. They learned that during the COVID time that they didn't have to sell as many vehicles. They would ration the chips to the higher trim level vehicles and they could make way more money, sell one of these top trim level vehicles instead of selling 10 or 12 base trim vehicles. And they knew that, but the consumer just never read between their lines. Okay, sure, they'll give you an all-terrain tire because that seems to be the focus now. And what they're doing is now dressing these trucks up, putting a nice set of all-terrain or mud-terrain tires on there from factory. Give it sort of that off-road vibe because that seems to be the direction Ford and Stellantis and the Rams are doing. Try to give it a more beefy, rugged look. But at the end of the day, these are all little nickel and dime items. I mean, let's face it. You're putting tires on anyway, whether you're putting on $250 tires or $270 tires or $300 tires. At the end of the day, that might cost the OEM maybe an extra $500 per vehicle, but they're going to charge you on the back end on that sale huge amount by saying, we've trimmed them, we're giving these great extra features, we're giving these big upgraded tire package, these nice rims, and next thing you know, you're willing to spend an extra $9,000 because they call it some fancy off-road package and they put a $5 sticker on the side. Let's face it, this is what's going on at Ford right now. But with the internal combustion engines, of course, are always the hot spot. They're always good sellers, and Ford's always been leading the charge. Even those right now with the quality control and over 100 recalls, it does have a lot of people questioning what's out there. What can I even buy? I can't trust the reliability of Ford, GM, Ram, lifter issues there as well. Who's building a reliable truck? Sure not Toyota these days either. So who's building a quality truck? Nobody from what I see. That's my own personal opinion. But they still have to move metal somehow. So now incentives, slashing prices are one of them, offering long loan terms or long lease terms with favorable conditions are the only way they're able to move this metal. Now with the federal tax credit having gone bye-bye, well, here we are. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Would you in fact buy one of these new F-150 Lightnings with these improved and enhanced reductions in cost for MSRP for 2026? I'd like to hear your thoughts down below, everybody. You all have a wonderful weekend. Talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.